Elias Vance was a ghost who pushed a cart. He worked from midnight to 6 a.m. on the 48th through 52nd floors of the Chronos Solutions Tower, a glass monolith that pierced the heart of the city's financial district. Elias was 58, his movements quiet, efficient and perfected by 2 decades of scrubbing the remnants of corporate ambition from marble countertops and thick pile carpets. Chronos Solutions dealt in global asset optimization, a pretentious phrase Elias knew, for moving rich people's money around quickly and quietly. Their corporate headquarters was a monument to excessive liquidity, all brushed steel, imported African wood, and ambient lighting designed to make everyone feel smarter and wealthier than they were. The 52nd floor belonged to the executive suite, a sanctum guarded by biometric scanners during the day, but left wide open to Elias's mop and vacuum after midnight. This was where Victor Sterling, the 40-year-old CEO, reigned. Sterling was a media darling, perpetually tanned, perpetually smiling, and perpetually wearing suits that cost more than Elias's annual salary. Sterling had built Chronos from a boutique firm into a global player in 5 breathless years. Elias, who saw the genuine mess behind the polished facade, thought it felt more like 5 frantic years. Elias wasn't unnoticed, but he was unseen. He was part of the background, like the hum of the HVAC system. This invisibility was his greatest asset. It allowed him to observe. He knew, for instance, that the head of legal, Mr. Henderson, drank too much single malt every Tuesday and cried silently at his desk around 3 a.m. He knew Ms. Chen in acquisitions was having a discreet 6-month affair with a married partner at a rival firm, judging by the consistent use of a specific high-end cologne left on crumpled napkins. Elias never judged. He just filed the information away as part of the architecture of the building. His job was sanitation, but his quiet routine had developed into a form of passive, deep data collection. His eyes were trained to spot anomalies, a recurring stain on a specific file folder, a sequence of missed digits on a discarded whiteboard, the frequency of certain shred bins being bypassed entirely. Tonight, Monday, 1:30 a.m., Elias was in Victor Sterling's office. The executive area was massive, featuring panoramic windows overlooking the glittering city. On Sterling's immaculate Brazilian cherry desk sat a single discarded item, a thick, glossy printout, crumpled, and tossed directly into the wastepaper basket, a rare oversight by the meticulous CEO. Elias lifted the heavy silver basket. Usually, Sterling's waste was sparse, a few gum wrappers, a receipt from an exclusive cigar lounge, and the occasional half-eaten organic apple. This time, the basket contained only the crumpled printout. Elias pulled it out, smoothing the thick paper gently on his cleaning cart. It was a complex multi-page financial model, printed on high-gloss stock. The header read, Project Chimera, Q3 Asset Valuation. The numbers were staggering, even to someone unfamiliar with high finance. Elias looked past the large, bold figures to the smaller print at the bottom of the 4th page, where a handwritten note in Victor Sterling's aggressive, slanted script was scrawled in red ink. Need to goose the Q3, Q4. Use the Seychelles vehicle. Target 40mm spike. Keep it off ledger until post-audit. Elias didn't know what Seychelles vehicle meant, but he knew what goose the Q3, Q4 meant. It meant inflating. And he certainly knew what keep it off ledger until post-audit meant. It meant hiding. He refolded the document, his heart giving a single hard thump against his ribs. He dropped it back into the bin, completing his task. But the cold feeling of that red ink was now imprinted on his mind, a stain he was obligated to try and wipe clean. The next few weeks were a subtle education. Elias continued his rounds, but his mission had changed. He wasn't just a janitor, he was an evidence collector. He learned to distinguish genuine waste from discarded clues. The CEO, Victor Sterling, was a whirlwind of public charm and private paranoia. Elias noted that Sterling often worked late on Wednesdays, always ordering the same absurdly expensive takeout from a farm-to-table delivery service. Sterling would then disappear into the 51st floor server room for an hour, a space usually reserved only for IT security. Elias also noticed the paper waste pattern was shifting. More documents, not just Project Chimera, but others coded Project Cerberus and Project Midas were being shredded, sometimes haphazardly, in the public floor shredders instead of the high-security cross-shredders in the executive wing. Elias realized that the fear of a leak was making the perpetrators careless. His biggest break came from the 49th floor, the office of the Chief Financial Officer, Evelyn Marsh. Marsh was notoriously tidy, but she had a habit of throwing away test prints, documents with typos or formatting errors, directly into her bin, often with notes scrawled across them. One morning, Elias found a test print of a loan document. The loan was for $200 million to a subsidiary called Island Breeze Holdings Ltd. Ms. Marsh had written in the margin, "Typo, needs to read investment capital, not cash flow injection. The auditors must see assets, not debt servicing." Elias realized the scale was immense. Island Breeze Holdings Ltd. was a shell. The $200 million wasn't a genuine asset. It was a ghost entry, potentially designed to be shuffled between shell companies to create the illusion of constantly flowing, appreciating capital. The money was likely gone, or never existed in the first place, but was being kept alive on the balance sheet to satisfy institutional investors. The contrast between the fraud's massive scale and his quiet investigation was stark. He was assembling a $40 million to $200 million puzzle from damp coffee stains and paper cuts. Elias's biggest hurdle wasn't collecting the evidence, but moving it. He couldn't carry sensitive documents out, as the main lobby had motion-activated cameras and security guards who knew his face. His solution was ingenious and dependent on Kronos's arrogant disregard for his humanity. He started keeping a pair of worn, thick gardening gloves in his cart, ostensibly for dealing with particularly nasty waste. Every night he would fold the crucial scraps, a spreadsheet footer, a test print, a handwritten note, into thin strips and place them inside the hollow metal shaft of his mop handle. The handle was old, dented, and deemed worthless by the corporation. It was the last place anyone would look. Back in his cramped single-room apartment, Elias would meticulously unroll the scraps, using clear packing tape to stitch them back together on a large sheet of corkboard he kept hidden beneath his bed. The board grew, connecting lines, dates, and names. Sterling, Marsh, Project Cerberus, Island Breeze, Seychelles. The evidence was undeniable. Kronos Solutions was built on a magnificent fiction. The stress began to wear on Elias. He was sleeping only 3 hours a night. The weight of the information felt heavier than his cleaning cart. He knew if he was caught, he would lose his job, potentially face jail time for industrial espionage, and lose the tiny apartment that was his only shelter. His sole confidant was his daughter, Lena. Lena was a history teacher in a low-income school district, fiercely ethical, and utterly unconnected to the financial world. He couldn't tell her the full details, but he hinted at the danger. "I'm working on a project, Lena," he told her over their Sunday dinner, a simple roast chicken that always smelled better than Sterling's gourmet takeout. "A big project. It's about right and wrong." "You're always working on right and wrong, Dad," Lena said, smiling gently. "That's why you always pay your taxes on time. This is different. This is criminal. I have evidence that people, very powerful people, are stealing on a scale you can't imagine. It's not just money. It's people's pensions, their futures." Lena's smile faded. She knew her father was utterly honest, a man who would return a penny if he thought it wasn't his. "Be careful, Papa. Those people, they fight dirty." Elias knew the risk, but the images of the Project Chimera and Project Midas files haunted him. Project Midas, he had pieced together, involved artificially inflating the value of non-existent land holdings in the Brazilian interior, essentially creating billions in phantom assets on paper. Sterling was using Kronos's reputation to float this fiction, leveraging the fake assets to take out real loans. He realized he needed a bridge, someone who understood both the language of fraud and the process of exposure. His search led him to a name whispered in the late-night offices: the Serpent. The Serpent was the unofficial nickname for an investigative reporter named Cassandra Cass Thorne, who worked for a struggling but fiercely independent financial news outlet. Cass had a reputation for getting into the darkest corners of corporate America, But she had been quiet for the last year after losing a major lawsuit against a pharmaceutical giant. Elias found her personal email after fishing a discarded magazine from a bin on the 48th floor. A forgotten interview with Cass Thorne contained a subtle, personalized email address at the end. His initial email was short, cryptic, and terrifyingly vague. I have documentation of Project Chimera and Island Breeze Holdings. The Seychelles vehicle is fully engaged. Kronos Solutions. I am the cleanup crew. Cass Thorne received the email at 4:07 a.m. and immediately deleted it. It sounded like a prank, or worse, a setup. Kronos Solutions? Too big, too clean. And cleanup crew? Ridiculous. But something about the email nagged at her. The specificity of the terms. Seychelles vehicle was deep-cut financial lingo for offshore asset shuffling. A prankster wouldn't know that. Elias, receiving no reply, decided on a bolder move. He needed to prove his access. The following night, 3:30 a.m., Elias stood in front of the CEO's desk. Victor Sterling had left his laptop open, locked on the screensaver, but attached to a large color printer. Elias quickly typed a short note on a fresh sheet of paper. The wallpaper on your 52nd floor screen shows a yacht named the Siren. The name of the holding company that purchased it last month was Ocean's Kiss LLC, registered in Curaçao. Source, trash bin, 111420XX. He printed the note. He then took one of Sterling's heavy, personalized bronze paperweights and placed the note directly under it. The paperweight was too heavy to be moved by a draft. It was designed to ensure that the note was the first thing Sterling saw in the morning. He finished his shift and went home, his heart thumping a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He had revealed his access. He had crossed the line from observer to active participant. At 8:00 a.m., Victor Sterling walked into his office, noticed the paperweight, and read the note. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. The note contained information that was meticulously hidden, known only to a handful of executives. Sterling slammed his hand on the desk, buzzing his executive assistant. "Get security up here, now! Someone broke in. Check the cameras, check everything." The security team scoured the executive floor. They found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of tampering. The biometric locks were intact. The cameras showed only the slow, familiar path of Elias Vance, the night janitor, pushing his cart. Sterling, driven by cold paranoia, called the head of security. "Find out everything about the night crew. Start with the janitor, Vance. He's been here forever. Why is he here? What does he do?" Sterling's paranoia, ironically, caused him to generate more evidence. He began leaving frantic, coded voicemails for his CFO, Marsh, deleting them only after he hung up, unaware that the system kept backups. He started printing sensitive emails and immediately shredding them on the low-security shredder on the 49th floor, the shredder Elias had been monitoring. Elias found the remnants of the shredded emails. They contained fragments like, "The press will have a field day with the Brazilian land valuations," and "Need to liquidate Midas before the Q4 filings." Elias knew the trap was closing, both on Sterling and himself. He needed to move the complete set of evidence, which now filled his mop handle and overflowed into a discreet plastic cleaning chemical bottle, before he was discovered. He sent a second, very simple email to Cass Thorne, the Serpent. "The Siren is real. Check your spam. I have the files. 1 a.m. Tuesday. The usual place." The usual place was the small, deserted public park 3 blocks from the Kronos Tower, where Elias ate his lunch every morning at 6:15 a.m. just after clocking out. He had only been there once when she had been interviewed for a newspaper article, and he remembered the details. He hoped she would remember it too. Cass Thorne, who had already spent hours confirming the details of Ocean's Kiss LLC and the Siren Yacht, all verifiable facts despite being hidden from public records, saw the second email. Her journalistic instincts roared. This was real. The park at 1 a.m. was empty, save for the rhythmic swish of the city's sprinkler system. Cass Thorne, bundled in a dark trench coat, sat on a bench, looking nervous and out of place. She had brought a burner phone and a small encrypted thumb drive. Elias arrived not from the direction of the office tower, but from a nearby residential street, completing his walk home. He carried only a thermos and a worn leather messenger bag, his normal equipment for the trip home. He sat down beside her, not looking at her. "You're late," he murmured, his voice low and tired. "I had to make sure you weren't wearing a wire or that this wasn't a setup by their security." Cass replied, her voice rough, defensive. "Why did you choose me?" "Because you were the only one who seemed to understand that rich men ass money wasn't magic. It was just numbers they wanted to hide. I saw your article on the pharma settlement. You have fire. Fire doesn't pay the rent or win against billion-dollar firms. Why are you doing this, Elias? You'll lose everything." Elias finally turned, his tired, honest eyes meeting hers. "I've already lost everything that matters a long time ago. This," he tapped the leather bag, "is about making sure Victor Sterling loses everything he thinks matters. It's about the cycle. I clean up the mess. I'm just cleaning a bigger mess now." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out the old, battered mop handle. He unscrewed the worn, rubber cap at the top. From the hollow shaft, he pulled out tightly wound, thin scrolls of paper. Each strip held together with clear packing tape, forming long, continuous sheets of complex, reconstructed spreadsheets. Cass Thorne gasped. It wasn't a digital file, a single leak, or a whistleblower's memo. It was a physical, hand-assembled jigsaw puzzle of evidence. Dozens of individual documents, reconstituted into a coherent narrative of corporate malfeasance. This is insane," Cass whispered, carefully taking the documents. The sheer, meticulous effort was overwhelming. "The shredder on the 49th floor is faulty," Elias explained. "It leaves long strips. The trash bags are easy to retrieve before the compaction cycle. I spent 6 months putting the balance sheets back together. Project Midas is a fraud of $3.5 billion in phantom land deals. Project Cerberus is using the company pension fund to back high-risk, uncollateralized loans. Island Breeze is a money funnel. It all traces back to Victor Sterling and Evelyn Marsh. I have the names of the shell companies, the dates of the transfers, and Sterling's own handwritten notes." He pointed to a specific section on a reconstructed balance sheet. "See this notation? VS approved 1021. That's Sterling's signature, his direct approval of a massive write-off that never occurred. This proves his direct knowledge and intent." Cass Thorne felt a tremor run through her. This wasn't just a story. It was a career-defining exposé. It was the truth. "I can't promise your safety, Elias. They will come for you. I know. But I also know where the backup servers are. I know the codes Sterling uses for his private safe. If you publish this and they try to silence you, I will leak the rest. This is insurance." Elias stood up. "I have to get back to my cleaning cart. I'm not due home for 2 hours." He walked away, leaving Cass Thorne alone with a garbage bag full of meticulously pieced-together shredded documents, the most devastating piece of financial evidence the city had ever seen. Cass Thorne worked feverishly for the next 72 hours. She used Elias's physical evidence to unlock the digital trail. The names and dates he provided allowed her sources in the SEC and various offshore registries to confirm the existence of the shell companies and the non-existent assets. The $3.5 billion in phantom assets was being used to inflate Kronos' stock price and secure lines of credit, all of which lined Victor Sterling's pockets. The day the story hit, the city felt a physical shockwave. The headline blazing across the front page of the Independent Financial Daily and dominating every news channel was simple and brutal. Kronos fraud. Janitor. Trash exposes $5 billion fiction led by CEO Sterling. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, presenting the reconstructed documents like a forensic report. The inclusion of Sterling's own handwritten notes and the names of the shell companies, Project Chimera, Island Breeze, Project Midas, made the evidence irrefutable. The initial reaction at Kronos Solutions was disbelief, followed by sheer, unadulterated terror. Victor Sterling was in a morning meeting with institutional investors when his chief of staff slammed a copy of the newspaper onto the mahogany table. Sterling's face, usually so smooth and confident, crumpled into a mask of pure horror as he read the headline. The conference room dissolved into chaos. Before Sterling could utter a denial, the firm's stock, CHRS, was halted on the New York Stock Exchange. When trading resumed an hour later, the stock plummeted by 75%. Billions in market capitalization vanished in minutes. Sterling immediately went into damage control. He issued a frantic press release. "These are baseless, ludicrous claims by a fringe publication based on stolen, possibly doctored fragments of information. We are investigating a potential rogue janitorial employee." That last line was his fatal mistake. He had admitted that the information had come from the inside, from the very lowest rung of his own organization. Elias was at home when the news broke. He didn't watch TV. He simply received a single final text message from the head of security. "Your services are no longer required. Do not report for your next shift." Elias smiled faintly, a tired, satisfied smile. He was fired. He had won the first round. The next 2 weeks were a blur of federal and corporate turmoil. The SEC, previously slow-moving, was now in full crisis mode. FBI forensic accountants swarmed the Kronos offices, securing servers and seizing documents. Victor Sterling, now under house arrest and facing multiple felony charges, was utterly ruined. The yachts, the mansions, the private jets, they were all now legally frozen assets tied up in complex litigation. Elias, meanwhile, was moved to a safe house, provided by Cass Thorne, who was now a global sensation. He was the most unlikely celebrity, the quiet, meticulous janitor who had brought down a giant. Sterling tried every trick in his book. He blamed the CFO, Evelyn Marsh, claiming she had masterminded the entire scheme, and that he was merely an innocent victim of her deceit. Evelyn Marsh, however, had the foresight to keep detailed, coded journals of every meeting, and the reconstructed, shredded documents implicated Sterling directly with the VS-approved notation. Sterling then tried to discredit Elias, running a quiet, vicious media campaign painting him as a disgruntled, mentally unstable former employee seeking revenge. The campaign backfired spectacularly. Cass Thorne, anticipating this, released a series of photos. Elias's corkboard, showing the intricate, month-long effort of reconstructing the shredded documents. The public saw a man who worked with quiet, obsessive integrity, not a disgruntled thief. The image of the janitor painstakingly taping together the CEO's arrogance was more powerful than any legal defense. The final devastating blow came from a source Sterling thought he had eliminated: the head of legal, Mr. Henderson, the man who drank too much single malt. Mr. Henderson, facing disbarment and criminal charges, decided to cut a deal. He testified that Sterling had explicitly ordered the creation of the Project Midas fraud, and that the Seychelles vehicle was a specific code name for a Swiss bank account Sterling controlled personally. Henderson's testimony, combined with Elias's irrefutable paper trail, collapsed Sterling's defense entirely. And in his arrogance, looked small and haggard in a cheap suit. He was facing decades in federal prison. Elias was called to the stand to testify about his process of collecting and reconstructing the documents. The defense attorney, a sharp-toothed professional named Ms. Davies, tried to tear him apart. "Mr. Vance, isn't it true that you were trespassing? That you were deliberately stealing property from your employer?" "I was cleaning, ma'am," Elias replied, his voice calm and steady. "My job was to handle the waste. This was not normal waste. This was evidence of a crime. I simply organized it so that the proper authorities could understand it." "And you spent 6 months painstakingly taping together shredded documents. Is this the action of a normal, balanced man, or an obsession fueled by resentment?" Elias looked at Ms. Davies and then directly at Victor Sterling, who refused to meet his gaze. "I'll tell you why I did it, ma'am. I had a daughter. She needed a surgery 10 years ago. A routine procedure. I had health insurance through Kronos Solutions. When the claim came back, it was denied, citing a technicality in the subclause of the policy's asset limitations. It took me 6 months to pay that debt, working overtime every day. That policy, I later learned, was administered by a subsidiary called Gala Retirement Services." He paused, letting the silence fill the courtroom. "When I was rebuilding the Project Cerberus documents, I found something interesting. Gala Retirement Services, the company that denied my daughter's surgery, was owned entirely by Kronos Solutions, And the pension fund Sterling was using to back high-risk loans? That was my pension fund. And the policy subclause that denied my claim? It was designed to save Victor Sterling a few $1,000,000 a year by denying legitimate claims. Elias stood a little straighter. It wasn't resentment, ma'am. It was the simple mathematics of cause and effect. Mr. Sterling saved a few $1,000,000 on my health care, so he could finance the $3.5 billion ghost asset of Project Midas. I simply reversed the equation. I took his garbage and I created the evidence that would pay back every single stolen penny. That is cleaning up the mess. Victor Sterling's control finally snapped. He leaped up from his chair, screaming, "Lies! All lies! You're a filthy janitor! You're nothing! You touch my trash!" The outburst sealed his fate. The jury saw the entitled fury, the arrogance that believed the janitor was literally nothing more than a trash receptacle. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. Victor Sterling, the man who had controlled billions, was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His empire, Kronos Solutions, entered immediate receivership. The company was revealed to be little more than a sophisticated fraud vehicle. Its assets mostly phantom, its reputation toxic. The aftermath was catastrophic. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, but the vast majority of the company's investors were institutional, pension funds, college endowments, and the retirement funds of ordinary citizens. Through the legal efforts spearheaded by Cass Thorne, the few remaining legitimate assets, the Curaçao yacht, the Swiss bank accounts, the frozen real estate, were liquidated. The government secured hundreds of millions of dollars in restitution, which went directly to shoring up the exposed pension and retirement funds. Victor Sterling lost everything. His wife filed for divorce, taking the few remaining genuinely owned assets. His name became synonymous with greed and white-collar crime. The financial press, which had once heralded him as a genius, now universally condemned him as a parasite. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The irony was complete. The man who had believed himself to be untouchable, protected by layers of complexity and wealth, was ultimately exposed by the one person he deemed beneath notice. Elias Vance refused the media interviews and the book deals that flooded his mailbox. He refused the GoFundMe pages and the offers of large financial rewards. He had achieved his objective, the clean sweep. He took the small mandatory whistleblower reward the government offered, enough to pay off his apartment and ensure Lena's financial stability, and nothing more. He felt no need for wealth, only for integrity. 6 months after the trial, Elias visited the Kronos Tower. It was empty, dark, and hollow, the marble floors covered in dust sheets. The signs were being taken down. The tower was being sold to a new firm, one dealing in sustainable energy, not financial alchemy. He walked past the lobby and stopped at a nearby coffee shop. Cass Thorne joined him. She was now an editor, having won a Pulitzer Prize for her exposé. "So what's next, Elias? You saved the world's pensions. You can retire in peace." Elias sipped his coffee. "I hate sitting still, Cass. I need to work." "Doing what, cleaning up the SEC?" Elias smiled. "No, I took a job, part-time, down the street." He gestured with his chin toward a small, historic building. "It's a library. I clean the main reading room. It's quiet. People leave behind bookmarks, sometimes a margin note. Honest messes, easy to clean." Cass laughed, a sound of genuine joy. "You truly are the last man on the rope, Cinch." "Cinch?" Elias echoed, tasting the old nickname. "That's what Bull used to call me. I secure the line." He looked back at the empty, dark tower where Victor Sterling's name had once shone. The janitor, once unseen, had seen everything. He had frozen at the sight of the filth on the corporate soul, and then with quiet, determined effort he had scrubbed it clean. The debris of the powerful was nothing more than garbage to the patient eye, and in the end, the man who had the least to lose took everything from the man who had only ever valued superficial wealth. Elias had finished his final and most important shift. The quiet was finally clean.